Roma 0, Napoli 1. David Neres, as he said, he's not back. He's always been here. But Adam, he really has been stepping up recently with a few goals and another eye-catching performance here, both him and Noah Lang.
Yeah, I mean, there were the two focal points for Napoli in this game. They really did look like they were two most likely to kind of cause some issues in this match, alongside Højlund, who I thought held the line, considering the kind of deep-lying kind of formation that Napoli were playing, men behind the ball. It was a kind of a real team performance is what I would describe Napoli. It wasn't the most enthralling or aesthetically pleasing game for the neutral, it's fair to say. And I did struggle to keep myself entertained during this game, it's fair to say. And I had to remind myself after the game if actually any shots took place, because I really did struggle to think of them when the game was taking place. But it's one of those that Napoli will kind of reflect on and say, this was a solid performance in those circumstances, gives them a bit more belief. And I think, since Conte's been forced into, getting the likes of Noah Lang and David Neres, they certainly seem a lot more fluid in that attacking third compared to what they had. There was an instance when, for example, Politano came on, and the first thing he does is he runs at the defence, but immediately he gives the ball away to a Roma player, which kind of sums up Politano and his effectiveness in general terms. But this was the difference I felt Neres and Noah Lang kind of gave to Napoli. And I felt in the circumstances where they were very much a counter-attacking outfit against this Roma side, they really did kind of offer that kind of threat. Whereas for Roma, this is the kind of thing that we probably will talk about, is how Romanistes in general, should I say, kind of call this a clueless performance from Roma, because at times I really struggled to kind of understand what they were trying to achieve here.
Yeah, I think it was two teams that didn't really have much. Like, Napoli didn't create many chances. As you said, there wasn't many shots. But what they've got are players that at that moment can be pretty clinical. And with Neres in the form that he's currently showing, that one of those chances will get taken. And then Roma, like we've said a million times before, this attack just isn't clicking. The constant changing of the attack isn't working. And I know I'm a massive Evan Ferguson apologist. But I think I don't think he was particularly awful enough to take off at half time and then switch the attack one more time. For a player like Baldanzi, who is a great promising player, was a great promising player, but hasn't really had those moments and didn't allow Roma to be able to hold the ball up at the top of the pitch. I feel like even if Ferguson isn't scoring, what he's very good at is holding the ball up and bringing others into play. So I feel like, again, switching that attack from Gasper was just it felt a little bit desperate, a little bit clueless, like the Roma fans are saying, like, what are you trying to achieve here? And I think, I'm not saying that's why they lost the game, it isn't. No. But I think it's just a kind of symptom or a kind of result of what this Roma attack that we're seeing, and the kind of the lack of belief that Gasperini has in his attacking players, or the lack of faith in that system. I think it really is kind of quite jarring when you see it. But then the underlying thing here for Roma, and it's what we said, or what I said I was scared of before the game kicked off, was I hope they at least go for it. I hope they at least, like, at home, try and, like, stamp authority and be like, this is a big game. This is a chance for us to put a gap between us at the top and people below us. Like, this is the first chance in years that Roma might be in a Scudetto race and might be, the protagonists. Yeah. And it was just a bit lame and a bit pedestrian, and none of the players really stepped up. And at that moment, kind of watching that game, I was like, yeah, this is just why they won't be involved towards the end of the season. Like, their defense still looked pretty good. They were still defensively pretty solid. It was that one chance that Napoli had that they did put away, but it's just that lack of cutting edge up top. And now there's stories that Roma are going to terminate Ferguson's loans, that money can be used, like, reappropriated elsewhere, which I don't think would be a terrible idea for them. It depends who the striker is they bring in, but I think it wouldn't be a terrible move. But for Roma, it just felt super pedestrian, and maybe now it's just a bit of a dampener on, like, they're still in it. They're still, 1 point behind. It's still like game on, but it feels like a lot of that momentum and belief has just disappeared, right?
Yeah, you've described it perfectly. I think it's a difficult scenario that we find ourselves trying to describe this Roma situation, because whilst they have been riding a high with the consistency of the performances, it comes to games like this where you kind of scratch your head and kind of question like what we're trying to see out of this Roma team right now. And I kind of had a few kind of posts that I was reviewing today where it was like a lot of Roma fans kind of arguing that they need someone more physical up top. And I was thinking to myself, well, you couldn't get anyone more physical than Dovbyk and Ferguson in that respect. But it got me also thinking whether, Rory, the problem here isn't necessarily the two players up top, it's the actual system that's being played for them. So as you alluded to, Ferguson I don't think should have been taken off. I think it was very harsh for him to be taken off, and I appreciate why they did the move, but ultimately when they brought on Baldanzi, it didn't really change the matter. And I think for me, if you're getting a player like Ferguson to hold up the ball and play down the channels, but he's not in the box himself, where do you expect those goals to happen? And I do feel that because, and I've called this out previously, I don't feel this is yet what you would describe the Gasperini side, because we haven't got that fluidity in that final third. And certainly there are certain players that really do look like they could be part of it. You know, likes of Wesley, for example, I thought was one of a few bright sparks on the night. But again, it was that end product that was really disappointing. When you've got players like Pellegrini on the pitch, or Sule, for example, even Dybala when he came on, they really didn't have that impact in this game, where you kind of looking at this game from the outset and before the game was kicked off as you need those players to pick themselves up and be the kind of, you know, the man to be counted for in this encounter. And they just didn't apply themselves, Rory. And I feel that is fundamentally the issue that possibly Gasperini is starting to realise, is that he's going to have to free up the funds in some capacity. He's probably going to do it with Ferguson, unfortunately. But is that going to be enough? I feel there'll be more departures in January, personally. And I'd be curious whether Dybala is going to be one of those that might be kind of offered out to maybe Saudi or somewhere like that, for example. Because if they're realistically going to try and reinvest, they're going to need to offload some of that kind of weight that they've got right now. And that's the only way they're going to do it, because I don't see many players accumulating high fees, and that's the worry. I remember, what was it, last Monday we were talking about Kone, and potentially, you know, if an Inter was sniffing around for him, that would be the ideal scenario for Roma. But equally, that could dismantle what Roma are trying to achieve. So I think there's going to be some balancing decisions that need to be made. But ultimately, on the reflection of this game, they're not there yet. They're not there. Whereas Napoli just seems a bit more assured. And I want to kind of call out from a kind of Napoli perspective how solid that defensive line was in Buongiorno, for example, Di Lorenzo, Bakoma and Rachmani. They were so good, as well as Milinkovic-Savic, who didn't really have much to do apart from that late save from Baldanzi, ironically. That was the only kind of shot of any count to kind of recall from this match. So, yeah, I'd say a fantastic result for Napoli that gives them a bit more confidence in this title race now.
Well, it's kind of interesting that there's been that switch to the kind of in system from Conte, and it's kind of been forced onto him through the injuries to De Bruyne and stuff. But it's allowed them to bring McTominay back central rather than having him forced out wide as he was playing earlier in the season, and then giving Noah Lang and Neres the minutes that they need to play themselves into form, to form partnerships on the pitch. Like, Conte's had his hand forced, but he's dealing with it pretty well so far. Like, they do still have quite a few injuries, Napoli, but we are seeing an uptick in their form, and it goes to show the kind of, I think people talk about Conte like he's a very, very rigid manager, like he has his 3-5-2 and that's all he does or whatever. But I think he's shown a little bit of flexibility here, and he's showing that he can adapt to situations, and Napoli are getting the job done in these big games.
Yeah, and he alluded to this post-match that, you know, I think this message wasn't about a message to people who didn't believe in them, and this is a message to themselves to kind of say, you can do this, and this despite everyone doubting you. I think that was the key here. I mean, the fact that he's, you know, had supposed public spats with the likes of Noah Lang, for example, and he's able to still get him involved in terms of the team, goes to show you that there's that flexibility that despite his maybe personal feelings about the player, he's still able to put that to the side for the team's benefit. I think that's kind of showing his flexibility in terms of, he could have been stubborn. He could have just said, this player doesn't want to play for me, and therefore, you know, he's not really showing any kind of desirability to be at the club. And I think that's a huge, you know, kind of testament towards his temperament, which can be sometimes in doubt when it comes to Conte in general. But yeah, I do feel, look, the circumstances was alluded to that Roma were the favourites in this game. They were also the most likely to be happier if they took a draw out of this game rather than Napoli, potentially. So he's gone out there, he's done the job like you would expect him to do in these circumstances, and puts him in a favourable position going forward. I think this is only going to solidify the kind of sentiment of that they are still in this title fight, and they're going to be a force to be reckoned with.
No, absolutely. And I think I'm looking at that, and like maybe it's like Conte was playing 4D chess the entire time when we were like, oh, him and Noah Lang falling out with each other. Who could have seen this coming? But maybe it was a bit of like dick swinging between the two of them, right? If you know what I mean, like Conte's like, right, you think you're in charge, I'm in charge, right? I decide if you stay or go. Oh, you think you're in charge? Well, I want to leave, right? And it just maybe it was just two fucking dickheads trying to out dickhead each other. But I think I've been impressed with Noah Lang and his directness and his speed. He looks like he could cause teams real problems this season. And you can see the player that Conte was attracted to and why he would have brought that in. I think if we see a bit more cutting edge with him, a few more goals, I think we could really see him as quite a clever signing. Again, all of this with the massive caveat of them not actually properly falling out. But I think he's been quite an exciting discovery over the last couple of weeks for Napoli, right?
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree. I feel it's one of those that with him, it's always been about him having the right frame of mood and temperament for the projects itself. It feels like that's been an ongoing theme within his career. But, you know, given the kind of publicity of what they said to each other, it feels like they've put that to the side. And, you know, the performances have kind of followed on from that because he realizes that if he doesn't do anything, then potentially his chances of being in a World Cup squad are at impact here, potentially. So I think what we've started to see from Noah Lang is a person that's put that to the side. And, you know, he's kind of performed in different ways as well, because he's not your just traditional kind of player that likes to take on his man. He can get his head stuck on things as well. As was proved with the goal against Atalanta, he gets on the top of the cross and heads it into the back of the net. So that goes to show his flexibility is the type of player he is. But yeah, he's exciting. It's without a doubt, there is a player within him. And if he can continue in the same consistency, he's going to shut out the likes of Politano from being in this squad. And, you know, I think this could be just what they need right now, because given the type of players that are missing right now in terms of the likes of Kevin De Bruyne, for example, and Guisa and Lukaku, I think that's the key one, was when Lukaku is potentially back in either late December/January, then we're starting to see, you know, them two between him and Neres really offering Lukaku some more threat in terms of the final third. And maybe also when you think about the dynamics, is he's able to hold up the ball and play off to the likes of Neres and Noah Lang in those kind of attacking third wing, kind of in central kind of wing players that can come on the inside and then bomb forward. I think that's going to be critical in terms of potentially getting more goals going forward. So this could be an interesting period for Napoli in terms of turning that kind of period where they've been losing or been in doubt in terms of their consistency, and actually maybe being a bit more consistent in the league performances as well.
No, I think you're right. Lukaku coming back into this team is going to be massive. I think you can see him. I can see him already holding the ball up and laying it out on the wings for them to run onto, like, so much.
100%.
I think that is going to be huge, and people maybe are forgetting that he's to come back. But this is actually quite an important win for Napoli. Like this year, they lost to Milan. They lost to what was the other big game? They lost to.
Well, they beat Inter, didn't they? They beat Inter 3-1.
And then I'm just scrolling through. They beat Inter. They beat Atalanta. I suppose that's a big one. So this is quite big for Conte. That it's a statement win. One of the challengers. Like it's just a big, especially away. Like that kind of like right. We can do this. And his post-match comment said as much. I told my players to look opponents in the eye. We show responsibility, desire, and enthusiasm despite absences. It was about, this is his call. He's been calling them out forever for not fighting enough. And in this game, even though it wasn't a massively impressive performance, there was more fight in the performance, definitely.
There was a lot more solidity is what I would say about this performance. You know, given the fact that they barely had a lot of possession, in particular that second half, you know, where Roma are all over them, right? But they just can't create anything because of how solid that kind of back line was. And even the players in front of them, they probably were absolutely knackered. I saw Lobotka making a professional foul on, I think it was Wesley.
It was
one of those that I had to smile because I was like, that is basically what Conte wants. He wants players to just do the kind of games management piece in terms
Well, you
of
have to take
just
them.
seeing out the
You have
result.
to take
Yeah,
those
you
pushes.
have to take them.
Yeah,
But yeah, that was the thing. And I feel that was the key between what Napoli kind of portrayed versus what Roma did. Because like I alluded to, Roma needed those bigger players to step up and really take a grip of the game. And they just really didn't deliver in that respect. But also, it's also, for me, I just don't know what Roma were trying to do. You couldn't really see kind of a game plan. You couldn't see like a plan B. You didn't really see them change their style of football as such. It just felt like, let's try and play it round and see if we can get a ball into the box in some mean, right? But it wasn't really like, let's be more direct. Let's try and pump it up. Let's try and get our physical men into the box. You didn't really see a lot of that. And I think that's the disappointing aspects about Roma's performance. But ultimately, even if they did try and do that, I just feel Napoli could have defended it all night. That's how good they were.
Yeah. No, absolutely. At no point did they really look massively uncomfortable or like they weren't going to see it out. Even, as you said, towards the end, Roma were piling on the pressure, but they kind of dealt with most of it. And when you've got Milinkovic-Savic in goal as well, you've always got that last line of defence.
Yeah.
It's going to keep you in most games. But huge win for